Hello and welcome to the Volleycast. I am your host, Joe Trinzi, coming to you for the second day in a row. Wow, getting off my butt, and I'm actually doing some podcasts for the literally dozens of listeners to the Volleycast. So, as my daughter, who should be napping, is making her voice heard, maybe you'll hear that, maybe you'll not. I apologize if there's any audio. This is a low budget operation, but hopefully some of you have had some takeaways and get a fair amount of questions from the Coaches Workshop participants or from some of you listeners. So it sounds like some people are enjoying this podcast. And I had a good follow-up question to the last podcast. So I thought I'd share it here and share my thoughts on it. It's generally sort of my policy now when people email me or text me or whatever like that, trying to make these responses like podcasts or videos or Instagram posts or something like that. Just because I think it's nice to kind of share these dialogues. I started doing that a couple of months ago, kind of with these coaches workshops. They've had some good dialogues. It feels like it stimulates some things and piggybacks off. So please email me. That's joe.trinzi@gmail.com or tweet or Instagram at Volleycast. Because I think that there's some good discussions that occur. And I don't know if you have a question about some of these topics. Somebody else out there probably does too. So was sort of the question was, you mentioned this briefly on the pod, but I was wondering what you're looking for these days when you're going through film. Like, do you go through it once and just see what catches your eye? Do you go through person by person? Do you watch every play? You know, kind of how do you organize your film? So that's a great question. Yesterday, in the previous episode, I was a more prepared podcast host. I would know what episode it is. I think it's 32, but whatever. It's the one before this one. I talked about the value of watching video for coaches and how much that accelerates your learning and your development. It's not quite as good as being involved in a live match, but in some ways, there's some things that you can gain by watching video that you can't gain by coaching live. A lot of things you can't, but you can, in a way, think about it as like doubling or tripling or quadrupling your coaching experience. Like if you go through one season live, but you watch 3 or 4 times more matches than you participate in live, it's almost like you went through 3 or 4 seasons instead of just one. So after a 5-year coaching career, if you're watching a video, you could have the technical knowledge of somebody who's been coaching for 20 years. You might not have the wisdom that it takes with experience, but in terms of knowing what goes on the volleyball court, you can rapidly accelerate your thing. So, hey, how do I watch video? Do I just kind of watch it and see what catches my eye? I think that's a perfectly valid way to watch video, but I think there's some potential upgrades. And some of my thoughts on this are this. I'd like to have some kind of organizing structure to how I watch video. When we're aimless, when we're not intentional about anything, we'll just sort of do whatever's comfortable, right? Or whatever grabs our attention. So if we're just watching video, we'll watch what grabs our attention, right? And what is that? That's the ball. So we'll follow the ball out of the server's hand to the passer, to the setter, to the hitter. That's kind of what most people do. That's what most of our beginning players do, right? They just watch the ball. And a big part of becoming a better player is to learn to not follow the ball, but actually get ahead and look at, not follow the ball in all situations. Sometimes you got to follow the ball. But, if you're a big blocker, one thing you have to learn is not just follow the pass the whole time, but actually get ahead of the pass and watch the setter so you can anticipate their moves. And if you're a defender, you don't follow the set all the way to the hitter, but you get your eyes on the hitter a little earlier and you can start picking up some things about, their arm or their approach and some things like that. As coaches, it's really important to do. It's really important. One of the biggest upgrades in my coaching career, for example, I was coaching hitting. A coach, I wish I could remember who it was, said to me, it was basically just like, half or more of the hitting errors or hitting issues that you see at the end of the swing were actually started right at the beginning of the approach. So, early in my coaching career, I was always just following the ball. So then so much of my feedback was all like arm swing on hitting because I would see the last split second of the swing. So, it's get your elbow up or get your arm back or do this or get your hand on the ball or, whatever that kind of feedback was. But, as I started to just say, okay, I'm going to know where the set and the ball is at the corner of my eye, but I'm going to watch the hitter's approach. Well, I would start to see, okay, they're late on their approach. So now it's rushed. So now the arm swing is rushed. And yeah, now they're hitting with a bent elbow. They're not extending up because they were late. Oh, okay, so it really wasn't their arm swing. It was the timing of their approach. So there's all kinds of things like that. So when I'm watching video, studying video, I try to go into it with some intention. I'm thinking at the end of this time period, whatever it is, and link it to something longer than just that day. A lot of times, more on that in a second. But it's like, at the end of this time period, I'd like to have moved the needle in this area or that area. I'm going to be by some fraction better at this part of my coaching eye, this part of my understanding of the game. I'm going to be 1% better at understanding setter footwork. I'm going to be 1% better at understanding this team's tactics, whatever it is. That's deliberate practice. Cal Newport would call it deep work. There's a fantastic book, and he's a great author to read. So that's sort of setting an intention and focusing on something that will move the needle. Hey, if I could be in some small but measurable way better at this, I could contribute more to the staffs that I'm on. I could add more value to the teams that I'm a part of. So that's deliberate practice. So in concrete example, I finished a project a few months ago, but I was using this example. I watched every match of the NCAA tournament, something that I like to do at the end of the women's U.S. women's NCAA tournament. There's 63 matches in it, and not all of them are like even matches, but it's good teams. It's in the ballpark of the 64 best teams. There's a few teams from smaller conferences who sort of make it in that ordinarily otherwise wouldn't. And there's always a few good teams that don't make it, but it's some of the, in the ballpark of the best teams in the country. And especially as you get on in the rounds, you get a lot of really great matches, a lot of even matchups, unless you were playing Stanford this year, but everybody else was pretty even matchups. And, you can learn a lot. And it's a pretty relevant sample. It's not just one conference. It's, teams from all over, lots of different styles of play. So it's a good sort of barometer. You can kind of see what's going on in NCAA volleyball as a whole. So this year I watched it, and what I particularly wanted to do was watch every defensive move, every dig, but also every non-dig, so every like defensive opportunity this NCAA tournament. So you can do that through VolleyMetrics, obviously. So you have your VolleyMetrics account, you can do that. Otherwise, it's a little harder. But if you're motivated, you can probably get your hands on all the video. It's nice on VolleyMetrics because you can skip specifically to the digging opportunities. But even without it, it's not that hard to fast forward through raw video, and when the attacks are going to be, et cetera. And I had a pencil and paper, and I was charting some stuff. In particular, this was actually a project for Gold Medal Squared. So shout out to Gold Medal Squared, the clinics that we do. If you've never been to a Gold Medal Squared coaching clinic, I think there's just a lot of awesome stuff. We got the online platform that's GMS Plus. So a lot of you probably know about Gold Medal Squared. So this is a project for Gold Medal Squared. I kind of do this stuff anyway, but then I'm like, well, okay, let me make sure I'm doing this in a way that can also add more value to the content that we teach. So we're trying to get better information for, our Gold Medal Squared customers about defensive, individual defense. So, you got your team defense, but then you got your individual defense. So what are the most common defensive moves? How often do they occur? What's the success rate? How often do they turn into transition, et cetera, et cetera? So I really wanted to deepen, my knowledge base and, the volleyball world's knowledge base about what happens on defense. So I'm doing that. So I'm watching all this, and I kind of have this sort of chart. I make 5 broad categories of defensive moves, and then within each of those, a couple subcategories. Some specifics, so all in all, it's like 15 different defensive moves. Every one I'm charting, whether it was used, whether there was a dig, whether that dig resulted in a transition swing, whether that transition swing resulted in a kill, et cetera. So just getting some information on that. And over the process of that, okay, if there's some sort of discrete data that I'm gathering, data or statistics is just your observation with a good memory. So, this project was like 8,000, 7,000 defensive opportunities. Nobody can remember 7,000 different plays. You'll remember the overall impression that you had, and that's valuable. And then if you also want to have some specifics to fill in, it's good to kind of chart it with the end in mind. They're both valuable. You want to have your intuition engaged and sort of your radar. Okay, that was kind of interesting. Let me watch that play again. And then it's good to have some things marked. But kind of the main thing is like there was an intent and a purpose. I wanted to understand more about how often certain defensive moves were used, how often they led to transition. If, I wanted to kind of look a little bit between, do certain defensive moves or certain styles of defense, certain ways of playing defense lead to more digs but fewer transition kills, or vice versa? Is that a thing? Is it not a thing? So I wanted to just understand more. So there was an intention. There was, kind of like a deliberate practice to that. And I think having a deliberate practice to your video, a structure to your video session is important. But it's sort of like anything. You're striking the balance between depth and breadth. You can get a little too myopic at times, and you can get a little too narrow-minded and lose some creativity. Writers like David Epstein in his book Range have discussed the limitations of the deliberate practice model and deliberate practice research. It's, I don't want to say overstated by Anders Ericsson, but maybe overstated by people who have heard of these deliberate practice, these 10,000 hour models, and maybe not understood all the things in the research. So David Epstein, in his book Range, he's going some research and he's arguing for a balance to be struck between specialization and generalization. So, hey, it's everything in moderation, even in moderation. So you have you need all of that as a coach. As coaches, we have times when we're both generalists and we have times when we're specialists. You can't be a head coach and not understand certain aspects of the game. Well, you could be, but I think it might not be a very good one. However, also you may have roles on staff where you do have to specialize. Hey, we need this year, you need to get our middle blockers better. This year, we need to upgrade our passing. You need to dive in and increase your depth of knowledge, not just your breadth of knowledge, but your depth of knowledge about passing. That's what we need for you. Whatever it is. So we want to balance that. We want to have a lot of video watching that's deliberate, has a specific intent, something that we're specifically trying to get better at. And then we also want to have some time where it's not. I think most of your video practice should be really deliberate and should have a structure behind it. Some things that I like to do, some structures I have is like a study. For example, I talked, this kind of idea of like a study. Okay, I'm going to categorize these defensive moves and watch them with the intent of like filling in knowledge about this, kind of like this deliberately constructed study. It's got some value to it. There's a way of doing that. I've done a bunch of, I've done more of that than most. And I got a lot of value out of doing stuff like that. Something that I also like to do is have a side out log or a point scoring log. So I watch a match and I watch all the side outs by a team. And I just kind of chart how they're trying to side out, the flow of the match for that team, what they're doing, what choices the setters are making, what opportunities the passer is creating, how they're scoring, what the flow is like that, or vice versa, like your break point, as some of our international coaches say, or your point scoring, when you're serving. So what's the flow? Where are the servers targeting? Do they stick on the same target? Do they change? Do they mix it up? What are the blockers doing? What are the defenders doing? So this is great for our team to see like, hey, are they doing what we think we should be doing? How effective is it? And it's also good when you study the other teams. You're trying to learn more about, okay, hey, I'm trying to figure out why this team has been successful. That's what I've been doing to some extent, although I've been doing it through more of a rotation study. So that's another way you can frame it. You can, as I'm studying Creighton's video in preparation for the coaches workshop tomorrow with Kirsten Bernthal Booth. 3 spots left if you want to register. Kind of weird. We had like 15 signups like right away. And then over the last couple of days, only like 1 or 2 have trickled in. So there's still like 3 spots left for that. If you guys are hearing this on Thursday and sessions on Friday. So yeah, should be a good one. So I'm kind of watching it through a rotation lens, and I'm looking at how they stop teams in rotation 1, how they stop teams in rotation 2, et cetera, et cetera. So I can get a feel for how they're serving, how they're blocking, how they're defending, what tactical and technical choices are they doing there in those rotations. So rotation study is a good way to outline it. Sometimes watching the TV footage is kind of valuable. So you could be on one or two sides of this. Either you've only watched sort of television footage or watched, like from the live perspective. Okay, then you need to go and watch more scout video. Specifically, I'm talking the N-line fixed camera where you can see the whole court all at once, like all 12 players. So you need to do more of that because there's a lot that you can see. It's the best way to see the whole court. It's the best way to see positioning. You can see everybody's movements, all that. But sometimes when you get used to watching all of that, sometimes when you watch a match on TV, you see some different things. The amazing slow motion HD television cameras that we have. You can see some little details that are really interesting. I've actually been enjoying a lot of the beach, with the beach consultation that I'm doing. I've been really, FIVB World Championship, stuff like that. They have some really interesting slow-mo. You can see some nuances on passing, on blocking, on attacking. When beach players are hitting certain shots, it's kind of interesting just seeing the changes in the arm, seeing the changes in the hand. So take some time to watch some TV footage if you only watch scout videos. Sometimes you'll just see it in a little different way. You can see the emotion a little bit more. You see the timeouts, you see the huddles, you see some of the interaction between players that you miss when you're just watching that scout video. You can't see the body language and stuff as well. And the final structure is teach. You learn by doing, and you also learn by teaching. So, I've been doing a lot of sessions with some club players, some club teams over these last few months, some virtual sessions. Done a lot with setting, a lot of setter sessions. And it's been just interesting, going through and say, okay, hey, I'm going to try to teach these setters a concept. I want to teach them about, hey, coming off the net and using a pivot, or what do you do? How do you handle tight passes as a setter? You got to be sharp when you teach something. And a lot of times as coaches, like, we know it, but it's like, we got to really know it. Especially if we're teaching people we've never interacted with before, because you can't rely on that institutional knowledge, because they're going to ask you questions that are like totally out of left field. And if you're not really clear, especially if you only have a limited time frame to teach, you got to really be clearer and you got to be precise. So that's fun. These coaches workshops that I've been doing ostensibly are for all of you people who are attending, but reality, they're for me. I started doing these coaches workshops to scratch my own itch. It's coaches that I wanted to learn from, calling up coaches, like this weekend's Kirsten Bernthal Booth. Last weekend, it was David Height, talk to Lucas Slave, talk to Danny Busman Kelly, talk to all these coaches. These are people that I want to learn from. And I'm a lot of them asking questions that I want to ask. Now, fortunately, it seems like a lot of you have the same interests and have a lot of the same questions. And of course, when you attend, and those of you have come to a session and participated, now you're asking questions that I didn't think to ask as well. And okay, I learned from that as well. So yeah, it's just entirely selfish by my part, but you all seem to enjoy it. So that's great. That's always good when your self-interest align with the interest of others. It's kind of my goal in life. So I learned a lot by that because it's kind of this really great structure for me. So every week I'm talking to a new coach and we have a pretty specific topic. So that gives me a structure. Hey, I'm watching their video to understand this better. And some of the coaches have been more familiar with, some of the teams have been more familiar with, I watched a lot of USA women's already. Of course, I was on the national team staff. So, hey, I've even been involved with some of those players. And then some of the new players, of course, I'm paying a lot of attention to them. It's USA, I always have a connection. And then with my role at Team Canada, sometimes I'm scouting USA as an opponent. So I was more familiar with them. And some teams like Creighton, like Louisville, I had to watch, not from scratch, because, hey, the reason that I want to talk to these coaches is because I've seen their teams and I've seen that they're good. And over the course of, studying the NCAA tournament or just watching this year, I've noticed some things. But I've been like, I couldn't rely on like, oh, I know that coach very well, and I know what their logic is behind that. I kind of have to like study and really understand the film and be like, okay, like, why do I think that they're doing that? So I can ask questions in an informed way and not seem like a total idiot. So it's really great. So it's like each week I'm trying to learn and understand as much as I can about a particular team, and we kind of have a particular topic about it. So I'm learning a lot from that. So maybe some of you guys want to try any of these things, any of these structures that I'm mentioning. Pretend like you're going to interview one of these coaches. Pretend like you're going to prepare to play one of these teams. Prepare like you're going to coach one of these teams. Hey, what would I need to know? What would I need to know if I was going to join the coaching staff of this team? And watch the video in relation. Hey, if Team USA called me right to, next week I had to start and I was going to become a passing coach. Well, I better really know what they're already doing, what they already look like as passers. That would require me to get really familiar with their passing technique. So, sometimes that gives you an intention, and it gives you a little bit of almost a sense of urgency when you watch film. So you're not just kind of like, following the ball. Oh, that's interesting. But you're really trying to have an intent. So that should be most of your video practice. All right. Hope all of you maybe gained something from this to understand a little bit about more how I watch film and how I kind of organize my practice of watching video, which I do every day. It's a rare, Sundays I take Sundays off, but all the other days, almost every other day, so 6 days a week, I'm watching film of volleyball. And I know a lot of you are too, and a lot of you are hungry to learn. So I don't know if you want any other tips about, hey, who should I watch with regards to this skill or this type of game? Hit me up, email me, tweet at me, DM, whatever. These various forms of communication. I'm doing my best to keep up with all of them. Email's probably best stuff. All right. So that's it for the Volleycast today. Anybody who wants to join in the conversation this weekend, still got 3 more spots for tomorrow. Hit me up on that. And otherwise, I will talk to you next pod.